A 14-year-old monster.
Classroom. She's walking down the corridor. She's going to the ladies' toilets. That's on the second floor. Immediately after, you see Chisholm. And at this point, he follows Colleen into the school toilets. It's also worth noting that whilst he does that, he puts on his white gloves.
Video family, we're examining a pertinent question: why are Americans so violent? We'll look at it from the lens of ethnicity, genetics, from the lens of nutrient deficiency, environmental impact, and social inclinations. We're examining the case of Philip Chisholm, who unalived his math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And we want to get to the bottom of why these individuals at such a young age, he was 14, would carry out such a brutal assault and attack on a teacher. He not only unalived her, but he also sexually assaulted her. Allow us to dive in.
Colleen leaving the classroom. She's walking down the corridor. She's going to the ladies' toilets. That's on the second floor. Immediately after, you see Chisholm. And at this point, he follows Colleen into the school toilets. It's also worth noting that whilst he does that, he puts on his white gloves. He pulls his hood of his sweatshirt over his head, and he actually checks his pocket to check for the box cutter. Now, a few minutes later, a female student actually goes into the toilets, but you see her immediately.
So again, the question remains, why didn't she report that something was going on that made her immediately leave that room? You understand what I'm saying? I'm wondering if she obviously didn't know who was in there. Maybe she thought it was two students engaged in some type of sexual act. I don't know. But again, that is very suspicious that she did not report anything according to this video as far as I can see. Allow us to continue.
The exit. 10 minutes later, Chisholm leaves the toilet. He's got hood over his head, and sickeningly, he has blood all over his hands, but there's no sign of Colleen. Chisholm then goes outside to the student car park and then re-enters the school building at 3:09 p.m. He's changed his clothes. Now he goes back into the classroom and he emerges at 3:11 p.m. with a red hooded sweatshirt over his head.
So obviously this individual was very calculating in what it is that he wanted to do, but he really didn't take into consideration that those cameras, even with his subtle attempts to hide who he was, makes no sense. If obviously he didn't know that they had cameras, or he didn't care, or he was in such a psychotic state that if he was in a psychotic state, that it didn't matter, even though he still went through the actions of trying to disguise himself. Very brutal, very calculating, very, very disturbing for this to be a 14-year-old young human and do this. So allow us to dive back in.
So this is an individual who's trying to disguise himself. And at 3:16 p.m, he goes back to the toilet. And at this point, he's actually gone and got a large blue recycling bin. This video of him basically wheeling the bin out of the toilets, going towards the elevator and then outside. Again, he's changed his clothes. He's now wearing a white t-shirt and a black ski mask. And he wheels the bin towards a wooded area, which is behind the school. 4 p.m, he's captured re-entering the school building. This time, his jeans are literally covered in blood and he's not wearing any shoes whatsoever. Then gets into different clothes, and this is all captured at 4:04 p.m. He's wearing shorts, black shirt. Then after a short while, he's seen again going back into the toilets. This is for a final time, and then he leaves the school grounds altogether. Now, there is another student's mother. Now, that mother said that they actually believe that they saw him running from the school. So that was reported to the principal afterwards. Doesn't take long for Chisholm.
I want you to look into the eyes and see, can we see any disturbances? In many individuals, we can see the disturbances by just looking into the eyes. I can't necessarily see this in this individual, but I've seen many pictures and many individuals and looked in the eyes of many individuals and know that they were disturbed. I can't see that in this individual, so that makes this even that much more alarming, because sometimes you can't even tell that these individuals are psychopathic in their own being, in the state that they are living in at that point in time. We look at him, he looks normal to me, but he committed an atrocious crime, and we're gonna dive into why I think that it's a combination of it's a combination of multiple things that lead to a disruptive mind. Some starts at birth, some of it is influenced by the media, some of it is influenced by culture, some of it is influenced by nutrition and the lack of the vital minerals for the brain development, for the stability, for impulse control. It's a ton of things that are going on that is producing these type of individuals at mass. This is not just a isolated type of incident. It may be isolated in the sense of the school being the case, but these individuals are killing at a much younger rate. What does the American society, what does the American culture, what part is it playing in the mental well-being and the psychopathic tendencies of many of our citizens? Allow us to dive back into the story.
To be reported missing. So his mother, Diana Chisholm, when she couldn't find him, this is around 6:34 p.m., she calls the police. And at 9 p.m., the principal of Danvers High School, they send out a mass email to the high school staff because obviously they have a missing student. Now, shortly after this email goes out, a teacher contacts the principal. She's spoken to Colleen's parents, Tom and Peggy Ritzer. And at the same time that everyone's concentrating their focus on this missing boy, it turns out Colleen hasn't returned home either. They report her missing to the police. This is around 11:20 p.m. So what does Chisholm do? Well, he goes and gets fast food. And then he goes to the AMC cinema. What we wouldn't expect to see within it is a malevolence in the behavior. And there is, because he uses Colleen's credit card. So let's fast forward to 12:30 a.m. that night. Officers spot this young male and he's walking on a nearby highway in Topsfield. So the officer asks him, "Where are you going?" And this youth says, "Nowhere." The officer then asks him to empty his pockets, and at that point, this young man produces credit cards and driver's license in the name of Colleen Ritzer.
So we have a commercial right here. Allow it to play through. Shouldn't make any noise. She should come right back on. But again, we'll break down peer influence, community environment, media, culture,
initially,
and a ton of other
he
things.
just says, "Oh, I found them at a Stop and Shop supermarket." But the officer straight away says, "Okay, well, there isn't one in Topsfield." And at this point, the young man says, "Okay, I took them from her car." And they actually only figure out who he is when they ask him his name. And at that moment in time, they realize this is the missing teenager.
So I'm wondering, from my own intuitive mind, is what is the gene lineage that he has? Is within his genealogical lineage, is there murder? Is there hyperviolence in those who preceded him, who he is the recipient of those genetic propensities? This doesn't mean that, this goes back to that argument, nurture versus nature. No, it's both. Nature has a role and nurturing has a role in the developmental outcomes of the human being at different stages, of course, but they are not nature versus nurture. It is actually nature and nurture, and it is actually a known fact that the epigenetic imprints onto the genes that are passed on through inheritance are there. There are propensities. That doesn't mean that you have to enact it, but if the environment is right for it, if there's nutrient deficiencies, if there is, again, an inclination towards more getting yourself exposed to violence through media, etc., that these things can trigger some episodes within an individual who is already compromised. I don't know. I don't know his lineage. I don't know. But these are questions we must ask because he's not the only one. Allow us to continue.
They have no understanding or awareness at this point that they've actually apprehended a murderer. At this point, they are also advised at that high school that Colleen's gone missing. And this is when things start to get really dark, because they start finding various items belonging to Colleen, but more disturbingly, items of blood-stained clothing in the bushes. They also find blood-stained white gloves. They discover a large recycle bin. Once the officers were able to view the school's security video as well, they immediately were able to build a picture of exactly what had happened, because they're able to see it playing out directly. Colleen walking into the toilets, followed by Chisholm. Chisholm coming out of the toilets, no sign of Colleen. Chisholm seen wheeling the recycling bin. Chisholm, of course, has been now apprehended by the police. He isn't just simply taken home because he's admitted that he's committed a crime. As far as they're concerned, he's broken into somebody's car and stolen their ID. So he's taken to the police station. And then they search his backpack and they uncover a woman's purse. And it contains a woman's blue-green underwear. They also find a box cutter with reddish-brown staining on. So they ask Chisholm directly, "Where's the blood come from?" He replies, "It's the girl's." When the officers asked Chisholm who this girl was, Chisholm just responded, "She's buried in the woods." But what he does say to the police is this: "After she insulted me, that's when I became the teacher."
So again, obviously this individual is highly disturbed, greatly disturbed, obviously by the actions that he took. So let's deal with some of the DNA and genetic factors that may be going on with this psychopathic young individual. So it says here, we're going to read it right quick. It says here, the genetic predisposition can influence behavior, including tendency towards aggression, but they are not deterministic, meaning, yes, it's there, but that doesn't mean it's going or it has to happen. Again, it's nature and it's nurture that plays a role in everything. Research has identified certain genetic markers associated with impulsivity and aggression, such as variations in the MAOA gene, often called the warrior gene. This gene regulates serotonin, other neurotransmitters linked to mood, impulse control. Studies like those by Caspi, 2002, suggest that individuals with low activity of the MAOA variants may be more prone to aggressive behavior, but only when combined with environmental stressors like childhood maltreatment. Again, it is pointing back to nature and nurture, and I'm not saying that this is what went on with this individual, but again, those who have low capacity and who want to just make an argument, especially those race hustlers who want to make an argument based on race, they don't like to dig deeper into what's going on within individuals, that it is not just nature, it is nurture as well. If we have these types of expressions manifesting themselves later on in an individual's life. It could be early in that individual life, but it's later on from the birth. Allow us to dive back in.
And then during that interview, as he's talking about what's going on, he then starts to confess to the fact that he's killed his maths teacher, how he punched her in the face, how he slit her throat before hitting her, then talked about how he removed the body in the recycle bin. Also, he goes on to tell the police where they'll be able to find the body, even draws a diagram. And one of the things that he said to the police was he wanted to humiliate Colleen, so he removed her underwear to do that. Now, whilst the detectives are continuing to interview Chisholm, they relay the information to the search team. It gets to about 3 a.m. in the morning, and the officer notices an area of disturbed ground in the woods behind the school. It takes them only moments to uncover Colleen's body, which has been put in a shallow grave, been covered up with just leaves and debris. We're talking about a 14-year-old child. 14. He'd also taken a large tree branch and inserted it into her. This is
a very valid and very valid and depraved type of behavior coming from this young man. And again, I don't see how he could be, again, rehabilitated. I just can't see it. In order to do that at that level, at that age, I don't see how this young man can be rehabilitated. I just don't see it. It may happen, but I wouldn't be willing to give him another opportunity out on the street. And I have empathy and sympathy for those who are going through these types of situations where in their mind. But there's a sickness, and I don't do this, that every human being is born in the image of God and this religious stuff. I don't play that type of, I don't play those games, because obviously those games have not stopped any of the vile, vulgar, and evilness that exists within this planet. A ton of sex trafficking of little kids, the actual violation of those little kids sexually, and all this type of stuff, the murder, the RAPE across the board, just the violence that's inundated within most of the countries of this world, especially in America. It's a lot of vile stuff going on. And I don't think that there's one individual up in the sky that's passively looking at these things and saying, I'm just going to let it happen, or I'm going to intervene. We have to become more mature in our thought process. Yes, there's a higher power than myself. I didn't create myself, but that higher power, that source, that information, that frequency, that vibration, that energy is within me because it's created me from the inside out. Allow us to continue.
About traumatizing the individual who finds her, as well as humiliating her corpse. They were able to find cells from her body which were consistent with the Y profile of Chisholm. He said that he'd got her twice. He'd her 16 times. Chisholm left the school toilets, and afterwards a cleaner goes in. They go in to get it sorted. And when that cleaner walks in, obviously they're greeted with the most absolutely heinous bloodbath of a place. Bear in mind that Chisholm has already talked about the amount of blood. You know, he's made a big deal of saying how much blood there was there. And we're talking about the toilets being the origin of the murder. So it's going to be covered. But their first language isn't actually English. So they know that something terrible happened. And so they want to go notify somebody straight away. And they go to the school custodian. And they explain in broken English that there's this large amount of blood in the women's toilets. Unfortunately, because of the language barrier, the custodian mishears and thinks that the cleaner says there's a lot of blue in the toilets.
So allow us to tie both to this actual video. And again, you can find that. Let me give credit to, I think it's called Kenny. I'll try to lay the link to this video actually in the description on YouTube. All right, so we'll definitely see if we can get that situation put together and make it happen. All right, so allow us to look at this right here. All right, so we're gonna finish out again. We're gonna tie a bow to this real quick. We're gonna go ahead and bring up the food factors that I was alluding to earlier. Again, it says nutritional deficiencies. Diets high in processed foods, low in nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, zinc, and magnesium may impair brain development and impulse control. That's because these nutrients, these minerals, these nutrients are very vital, are extremely vital to the functioning not only of the physical working of the body, but the mental working of the body as well. And remember, the brain is physical. The mind is not physical. It is unlimited. You can't grab it and hold it, but it is the product of the brain. if that makes sense. But the brain is a physical entity, so it needs omega-3s, it needs magnesium, it needs zinc in order to balance out and to develop the neural development of that young child and the continued development and stability of that human organism throughout its life. This is why we need to make sure that we have balanced mineral and nutrient levels, vitamins and mineral levels, in order to not only function at high levels on the physical plane, but also on the mental and emotional plane. We are connected, meaning this body is one unit. The mind, the brain, and the whole of the body is one unit. You cannot separate it. All of it plays a role and all of it impacts each other downstream. So we'll finish out with that. Again, what you want to know and understand is this: nature and nurture, they work hand in hand, meaning that nature provides the baseline for what nurture can do with a human organism. So both are important. And this is why parenting, as far as actually planning to have a baby, is far more wise than just randomly doing it, because you want to prepare as a woman, you want to prepare your body even before you go in to have the conception or try to conceive. Prepare the body mentally, emotionally, physically, and nutrient. You must do that in order to give that egg all the things that it needs in order to be as healthy as it can from the chromosomal and genetic level, as well as the sperm. This individual must protect himself, must eat healthy, must exercise, must think well, he must be in a good state of being mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And this gives that sperm the best chance to connect with that egg and the best chance for the chromosomal makeup of that new offspring to be as solid as possible with very little corruption to the sperm and the egg. That corruption that leads to a ton of illnesses downstream, not just physically, but mentally and emotional illness, as well as spiritual. Again, if you like the video, like, subscribe, and share. Have a beautiful day. Sending you peace and all